Hey guys, how's it going? I wanted to go over the affidavit of probable cause because there seems to be some confusion about it and whether or not it would stand up in court after the judge finds out all the facts. Because remember, this affidavit is really a document that is supposed to apprise the judge of the case. In other words, the judge pretty much comes in blind, and this is the document that the state is bringing to the judge to say, this is the information that we have, and this is why we think that there needs to be an arrest based on the charge of second-degree murder. So let's just take a look at the document and see how much of it is based in reality and whether or not it could stand up in a courtroom. So first thing we see is the introduction to the investigators. And then it scrolls down and they start listing their information. So it starts really this is just talking about their history and how many years of experience they have and all that stuff. None of it has anything to do with the case at that point. And then here the document continues to talk about what they gathered, basically the witnesses that they spoke with. None of this is evidence in the case whatsoever. So when we get to this point here, it starts giving us some information about what actually happened, and whether or not it's actual evidence is a whole nother case, but it does tell us some information about the case. So it tells us where Trayvon was living, etc. And that, of course, it's temporarily living, and that he went to the 7-Eleven to purchase a can of iced tea and a bag of Skittles. Of course, we know it wasn't really iced tea, but that doesn't matter. Martin then walked back to enter the gate and was on his way back to the townhouse where he lived when he was profiled by George Zimmerman. So there's the word, and they bring that up in the bond hearing, the original bond hearing, and talk about why they brought up the word profiling and profiled, and the investigator couldn't come up with who came up with the word or what exactly it meant. It certainly wasn't indicating a crime because he couldn't tie it to any specific type of profiling. So he wasn't saying this was a crime. But of course they had to throw in Martin was unarmed and was not committing a crime. Well, that is their opinion, of course, because we don't know whether or not Martin was committing a crime when George first saw him, or whether he had just come out of a house that broken into or whatever. We have no evidence of any of that, so it doesn't really matter. And here they say Zimmerman, who also lived in the gated community. Look, Zimmerman lived there. Trayvon didn't. They said temporarily living. Look, he was visiting his dad's girlfriend's house. So you got to understand, not only wasn't he living there, his dad wasn't living there either. I mean, he may have been staying with his girlfriend, but that wasn't his residence. They say he's driving his car and he assumed Trayvon was a criminal. Well, I don't know where they found that in the evidence, because there's nowhere in the evidence that that's made clear. Then they continue and say that George felt Trayvon did not belong in the gated community and called police. You see, that's another assumption on their part and has nothing to do with the facts of the case, because never did George say that Trayvon did not belong in the community. He had no idea whether he did or not. He knew one thing: he looked suspicious, and that's the only thing he said. Then they say Zimmerman spoke to the dispatcher and asked for an officer to respond because Zimmerman perceived that Martin was acting suspicious. Now that's one true statement that they've said here. So he spoke to the officer and asked for him to respond. He asked for an officer to respond because Martin was acting suspicious. That's actually what was said. The rest of this stuff is all bullcrap. All that up here, you could take all that out and just take this one sentence. I always believe in simplicity. Get rid of all that crap. The police dispatcher informed Zimmerman that an officer was on the way and to wait for an officer. That's not what was said. Actually, what was said, if you listen to the non-emergency call, he said to keep an eye on Trayvon and let the dispatch know if he did anything else. That was the first thing he said. So he said, keep an eye on him. So if you keep an eye on somebody, that means you monitor them, you watch them, you even if it requires following. How else can you monitor somebody? How else can you tell the dispatch what Trayvon's doing if he's not monitoring him? But then later on, of course, when he can hear him breathing hard, he asked him if he's following, and George said yes, because George is honest. And the dispatch said, we don't need you to do that. So he never said, don't do that. And he never said, wait for the officer. He never at any time said, wait for the officer. So this is, so far, I'm just proving that this document is full of crap, and the only real truth in it is the non-evidence information about where Trayvon was staying, that George was living here. These are things that are fact but have nothing to do with the case. Okay. One thing I noticed in the bond hearing that O'Mara brought up was the fact that in this affidavit they only quoted George twice, and both times where they quoted him, where they've got quotations around his sentences, he's using a swear word. And he pointed that out. He said, you know, he was on the line for a long time. He talked to those guys and said a lot of stuff. Why is it that you only focus on those words? Well, it's because they're just trying to get a conviction. They're not interested in the truth whatsoever. But they're using this one sentence where he says these assholes always get away to make all these assumptions that Zimmerman wanted to catch him. So here's how they say it. Right here, you can see it. During the recorded call, Zimmerman made reference to people he had felt had gotten away with the break-ins in the neighborhood. So because of that, now they're going to suggest that that's why he felt he had to chase Trayvon down and beat him to death or kill him. So during that time, Martin was on the phone with a friend and described to her what was happening. The witness advised that Martin was scared because he was being followed through the complex by an unknown male and didn't know why. That's pretty true so far. I mean, that's what information we have anyway. We don't know exactly what she said or what he said to her, but now's where it gets a little dicey, though. They say Martin attempted to run home but was followed by Zimmerman, who didn't want the person he falsely assumed was going to commit a crime to get away before the police arrived. See, this is the assumption they're making, and there is no evidence to that, even to this day, that Trayvon tried to get home, but George caught up with him. And they're making assumptions of what was going through George's head based on this comment, these assholes always get away. They say Zimmerman got out of his vehicle and followed Martin. But what they don't tell you, and what we've proven in our map videos, is that at the time George got out of his car, he had already lost sight of Martin, and there was no ability at any time for George to regain sight of Trayvon until Trayvon came back from his house all the way back up to the T where he assaulted George. And a lot of people are going to say, well, you're making an assumption that he assaulted him. Well, I don't need to make an assumption. George has the busted nose to prove it, and Trayvon doesn't. So if there was an assault, it certainly wasn't George assaulting Trayvon. And here's where they just straight out lie. When the police dispatcher realized Zimmerman was pursuing Martin, he instructed him not to do that and that the responding officer would meet him. Well, number one, the dispatch didn't realize that Zimmerman was pursuing Martin because the word pursue has a specific meaning, which means to chase with intent to catch. And we know that everything that George has ever done in the past and all of his other encounters, he never tried to catch the person. And he had said so in this, even in a lie detector test, that he did not intend to catch him, and the police knew that, and they put that in here anyhow. And then they say that he instructed him not to do that. Well, we know he said, we don't need you to do that. And then he said that the officer would meet him. No, he said that the officer would call him when he got in the area. Remember? I mean, a lot of us listen to the call. We're not depending on these people. I would have hoped the judge would listen to the call too, but you know how these judges are. They're lazy. They've got a lot of load on their plate, and they really don't care about justice much as how much money they can make. Remember, the majority of judges are ex-lawyers, and we all know how much we can trust a lawyer. But now they continue and they say Zimmerman disregarded the police dispatcher and continued following Martin, who was trying to return to his home. That is just straight out lying. That's not even funny, because we've got the tape. The tape shows us that he quit running. He quit breathing hard within 15 seconds of the time that he was told that they don't need him to do that. So it's a lie. And this is the information the judge had in order to set the bond. So if the judge had this information to set the bond and he still set it low, can you imagine if they had the real information? If the judge really knew the facts that Trayvon jumped on George and beat his head on the concrete and broke his nose and all that other stuff? Imagine if the George had our videos that show the time frame and how there's no way from the time George gets out of his car and Trayvon is running around that corner that George could ever catch up with him. There's just no way. And then with the sound of the call going on in the background while we're looking at the video at the layout of the complex, we can see there's just no way. There's several minutes goes by and George is talking calmly, so obviously he didn't chase him down. Either Trayvon hid in the bushes and waited for the last minute and then came out and confronted George, or he came back from his house. I believe he came back from his house, and my map videos explain that, and that's because Dee Dee said that he made it home, and also his dad's girlfriend said that she saw him on the patio, and I have the video for that as well. So we know this last sentence is a straight out lie. He didn't disregard the police, and he didn't follow Martin. There was no way. Now they say that George confronted Trayvon and a struggle ensued. Well, that was totally destroyed at the bond hearing. They had no evidence that George ever confronted Trayvon. And without that evidence, the case is a dead doornail. But I thought it was hilarious. If you want to see the actual video of the bond hearing, I can put that link on the on my comment section. But the volume is so low that you have to wear headphones to hear it. Really, I mean, at least with my laptop, I can just barely hear it. So they lied about that. That's just a straight out lie. There's no way for them to know who started the struggle or who confronted who. At least not based on the evidence, and they admitted under oath in the bond hearing that they didn't have that evidence, that there's no way for them to know. Witnesses heard people arguing. It sounded like a struggle. Yeah, that's true, but that's no evidence to point towards George being a murderer. So now they say that numerous calls for help, were heard by the witnesses, and also were recorded in 911 calls to police. And Trayvon's mother has reviewed the 911 calls and identified the voice crying for help as her son. But what's interesting is this is the only piece of information that they give about who suggests who it was. I mean, we've got George's father and the rest of his whole family saying, no, that's George. And in an affidavit, and like I've said before, the prosecutors tasked with giving the judge the actual evidence that they have, not trying to lead the judge one way or another, not trying to suggest that this is an absolute open and shut case. They're supposed to give all the evidence, including the exculpatory evidence that would lead to clearing George. But they're not bringing out any of that information. See, they should definitely say, well, Trayvon's mom said that it was her son, but George's father said it was his son. I would love to have Trayvon's mom take a lie detector test on that, and George's dad, and see which one actually passes. I don't think she would. Now they just say Zimmerman shot Martin in the chest. They don't give any background or any specifics, or nowhere in here are we seeing that Trayvon attacked George, or Trayvon was on top of George, or George had a broken nose, or gashes to the back of his skull, or black eyes, or blood all over his face. None of that is listed here. And that is perjury, because they are required by law to give the whole story, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And they swear to it. But here's where it really gets nasty. They say, when police arrived, Zimmerman admitted shooting Martin. Officers recovered a gun from a holster inside Zimmerman's waistband. Okay? Now, if they wanted to tell the truth, they would have said, when police arrived, Zimmerman admitted shooting Martin in self-defense. That he had been beaten severely, and that his nose was broken, the skin on the back of his head was busted open, blood was pouring out, and that the emergency personnel had suggested he go get stitches for his injuries, and that we found no such injuries on Trayvon. See, that would be honest. But obviously this is just a lying sack of crap. This is so much lies. Even the stuff that's true is shadowed in lies, because they're not giving. You got to have the whole picture. You can't just give little pieces, and that'd be like saying, somebody would ask, who ate the candy bar? And then you would say, well, the candy bar was on the shelf. That's true. We don't want to know that, though. We want to know who ate it, or whether what the point of eating it was. They don't want to get to the bottom of the case. They just want us to be fooled into believing the crap that they're lying about. They say a fired shell casing was recovered at the scene, was determined to be fired from that firearm. Great. So basically what this paragraph is saying is, this is the evidence they have. Zimmerman was shot in the chest. George admitted shooting him. The gun was recovered, and a casing was found that matched the gun. So nothing about self-defense, nothing about George's claim of self-defense, nothing. So then they go on to say that a doctor examined him, and the autopsy determined that he died from the gunshot wound. So this is their evidence of murder. The problem is they're leaving out the whole most important part. And, well, here's how they get around it. They kind of try to cover their ass, although it doesn't really work in this case, because you can't do that. And then at the bottom say, well, we didn't say everything. It says, the facts mentioned in this affidavit are not complete recitation of all the pertinent facts and evidence in this case, but only are presented for a determination of probable cause for second-degree murder. Well, if you're trying to present the evidence for a determination, for a judge to make a determination whether this is a valid probable cause for second-degree murder, wouldn't you think the judge would like to know, maybe, just maybe, that George's head was bashed on the concrete, and that his nose was broken, and that we have evidence, that we have witnesses showing Trayvon on top? I mean, where is the evidence? Where in this whole thing, please show me where the evidence where it talks about the witnesses seeing anything. I mean, they say that they talk to the witnesses. Where are the witnesses' statements? Where is any of the real evidence? Where is it? The only evidence we have is that Trayvon's mom heard the tape of the 911 call and said that was her son crying. And that's the evidence that the judge heard, and apparently that's the evidence the judge accepted to suggest that it was Trayvon crying, although we have all the other evidence to prove otherwise. So I just wanted to say this affidavit of probable cause is full of crap, and there's no way it can stand up in a fair courtroom. Impossible, especially if you had a lawyer that could argue the case specifically and point out all these complete fallacies. I don't even think that the people that wrote it should even be in office. I don't think that these people are smart enough to be there. I don't know how they got there. The guy that was interviewed was almost a complete idiot when you listen to him. I don't understand how these people could get in there. Anyhow, good talking to you guys. Talk to you later.